We have today Shubham Mishra. We're delighted to have you here with us today. Shubham, welcome to the CPR CSH workshop series, urban workshop series. Shubham Mishra is a PhD candidate at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning and Geoinformation Management, faculty ITC, University of Twente, in the Netherlands. His doctoral work focuses on building a digital twin of Shahnabad. His recent work includes www.wodilli.in, a web-based GIS portal that reconstructs mid-19th century Delhi. He has previously contributed to heritage and environmental planning projects, including mapping and designing a tree database for Sundar City and the Humayun Tomb Complex for the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. He has also provided planning and GIS expertise to organizations such as IZ, the World Bank, Center for Science and Environment, and SEEDS, working on themes related to sustainable urban habitats. Shubham's research interests are to study the historical evolution of landscapes. He reads Persian and Urdu, which is essential to understanding landscapes in Delhi. I'm also personally delighted to have him here with us because he works very closely with some very dear colleagues who are based at the University of Twente. Welcome once again, Shubham, and over to you for your talk. Shubham's talk is titled Hill, Forest, and River, the Story of the City. Welcome again, and over to you, Shubham.
Thank you, Professor Rajgopal, for the lovely introduction, and CPR and CSH for having me here. It's a humbling experience because I have followed this the urban workshop series, I think almost from its inception. First as a student at SPA, and I have attended several workshops here, and then later as a planner. So to be invited here as one of the speakers, I'm extremely honored and delighted. Before I start, I would want to say that this work is a work in progress, which I have been building upon for almost a decade, to certain professional assignments, curiosity, looking up similar works of other scholars, conversations with people, and also just walking the city, especially its ruins. Now, most of the research has some sort of a starting point. It could be, a moment of inspiration or an idea, or simply a thought process. This whatever work which I'm going to present started with a lot of daydreaming, and this started when I was a very, I must have been 9 or 10, and I used to stay in a neighborhood which is located very close to this citadel called Kotla Firozshah, or the capital of the fifth city of Delhi, Firozabad. Those of you who have been in Delhi for quite some time and have stayed in or have known the Delhi of 1980s and 90s, particularly this period, the months of April and May, you would recall that the summers used to be extremely hot, and they were characterized by the loo, or the hot and dry day winds. This has changed quite a lot in the last decade or so, where the summer months have started becoming extremely humid. So I grew up in that Delhi, and my summer vacations were spent. The mornings were, because they were very cool and pleasant. I would spend a lot of time with my friends in this citadel, and this was, as I said, it was located just behind the neighborhood where I stayed, and it wasn't a ticketed monument. It was away from the crowds or a lot of tourists, and we would just climb a broken wall of this fortress, and we would spend a lot of time here doing various things. One of my favorite pastimes used to be standing atop this pyramidal structure, which you see in the on the image on the top right corner, with the Ashokan pillar, or Ashoki Lat, as we used to call it, and just basically look at the city. So I used to do a lot of daydreaming here and imagine, and I would try and visualize a lot of things which did not exist anymore. So one of the things which fascinated me was to imagine what kind of city this would have been at the height of its glory in the mid 14th century, with Yamuna flowing in the east, skirting its eastern boundary, which you see in this reconstruction somewhere here. So I would stand atop the pyramidal structure and I would, uh, think about uh, the palace itself, uh, the Baoli, and various other buildings, which if you go here now, they are in ruins. And you can identify only three structures: the Baoli, which is still there and is used for watering this entire palace complex, the pyramidal structure, and the Jami Masjid, which is also very much in use. And Kotla Firoz Shah also is the abode of the two jinns. So there were various stories about the jinns and the people coming every Thursday, for and praying to them for various uh, you know, for whatever they wanted. So this my love for what I would say Kilebazi led to a lot of Nakshebazi, where I started looking at old maps of the city to understand the evolution. And as I progressed, I went to SPA to study urban planning, and I was engrossed in looking at city development plans, master plans, to understand what is the theory of city building. But later on, in my professional work and looking at certain texts on Delhi and generally on cities, I came across this beautiful couplet by Fani Badayuni, which is part of the second part of the couplet. Basti basna khel nahi, baste baste basti hai. And for me, this sort of summed up the city making and the evolution process probably in a larger way than I could have understood from looking at various planning documents and books. And what better city than Delhi to understand this couplet, Basti basna khel nahi, basti baste basti hai, than Delhi, which in its known history was um, evolved several times, was completely destroyed, razed to the ground, and rose again. So, what could have been the reason that various settlements we see on this map, these seven cities? Many historians claim that there were many more cities. Other historians say that there are only two cities, Mehrauli and Shahjahanabad, and then there are also numerous villages. So, why is it that all these settlements, urban or rural, roughly came in this location, where you see Yamuna on the eastern side and the ridge, which is not really visible on this slide, but we'll see it later, on two sides skirting it in the east and also in the south? Perhaps the answer lies in an old kahawat or a saying of Delhi that you need three ingredients for building a city: Darya, Badal, and Badshah. So Darya is pretty evident that we have Yamuna, but we will explore its role in slightly greater detail in just a bit. And you had the ridge on the eastern side, and then you also had parts of the ridge on the southern side, where we have Tughlaqabad right now. And this formed the famous Delhi Triangle, where all these settlements have roughly come up. This is just another view, slightly isometric in 3D view, to understand the ridge and the river. Yamuna had a very interesting role, because if we see the earlier settlements, if I can just go back to the previous slide, the earlier settlements of Siri, Tughlaqabad, Lalkot, Jahanpana, etc., they were never really situated next to the river. And uh, these cities have come starting from 11th century, and we see Firozabad for the first time in 14th century, that a city actually comes up next to the river. So these cities are away from the river. But Yamuna still has a very important role to play. It's been shifting its course. This is what it looked like in 1849-50. And if you see the top portion of the map, where you have roughly the boundaries of Shahjahanabad and the Red Fort, it's skirting its eastern edge. And as we move through time, in 1920s, in 1940s, and the present times, the course has been shifting eastwards, but still it played a very important role. Yamuna has several names. The two names which have sort of stuck in Delhi, one is Yamuna, or it becomes Jamna, Jamna Ji. The other is Kalindi. So both have, if we sort of see its role in the evolution of these settlements, I feel these two names are extremely apt. Yamuna signifies the fickleness of her nature. It's ever shifting. It's abandoning old channels, trying to find new ways. And Kalindi is what brings Kalindi refers to its turbidity, its murkiness. Kalindi brings the alluvium from the higher regions, and this alluvium fills the pediplain, which is formed between the Yamuna on one side and the Aravalis. So when you have this alluvium, this gives rise to this gave rise to a lot of opportunities for the early settlements which came up for agriculture, for making orchards, grazing grounds, etc. And so level areas were made into agricultural fields and all the natural streams. So that's the other part of the Darya. We have seen Yamuna, but from the Aravalis emerged numerous natural streams and channels, which filled this paddy plain. And these were harvested in various ways to fulfill the needs of the city. So we have seen Darya in two ways. And then we had the Badal. The Badal was extremely, if I can use the Hindi word, kanjoos. They were miserly. Delhi lies in a semi-arid region, so it did not really rain here. But the Badshahs, and there were numerous, if we start from the Chauhans or even earlier, the Mamluks, the Khiljis, Tughlaqs, they understood that there was actually a real Badshah over them. And the real Badshah, which has always been there, is the landscape or the terrain. They understood the importance of the terrain, the Aravalis on the left side, how they gave rise to these numerous streams, where water filled up, where it collected, and where different types of structures could be made for water harvesting, for agriculture, for drinking needs, and other things. So we see certain earliest water harvesting work, some of which still exist. A lot of them are destroyed, but a lot of them are still here. This is Surajkund, now in Haryana, and the site near is the place where we have the annual Surajkund Mela. This is one of the earliest water harvesting works built by the Tomar Rajputs, Surajpal. And we also had the Anangtal Dam and Anangtal and the Anangpur Dam, which again was built slightly earlier than Surajkund actually. This is from 8th century. And these masonry structures were made basically to impound rainwater, which would then flow to the areas which were made into settlements. From here, we move to the slave dynasty, where one of the most important waterworks came into existence in the 12th century, the Hauz-e-Shamsi. Hauz-e-Shamsi still exists in Mehrauli. If you go to Mehrauli, you will find this beautiful lake. And it's also the site where the annual Phool Walon Ki Sair Mela takes place. And there is a very interesting anecdote also related to Hauz-e-Shamsi, that how Al-Mush had a dream and with Prophet requesting him to make a lake in this region to quench the thirst of the city. And he consulted Bakhtiyar Kaki, who was the patron saint of Delhi, and he's supposed to have made this lake here. What you see here is a pavilion which used to be in the center of the Hauz, and you could approach it only with a boat. That situation has changed, and an important thing here is that a lot of these waterworks were made in continuation by different people. So the works which had been made earlier were recognized. They were by later rulers also. They were improved upon, and elements were added to them to improve their functionality as well as aesthetics. So we have Hauz-e-Shamsi, which belongs to the slave dynasty, early 13th century, and then we have Jahaz Mahal, which comes up next to Hauz-e-Shamsi, and a very important structure called the Jharna. So this is the actual extent of Hauz-e-Shamsi, and we will compare it very soon of how things have changed in the recent times. So the present Hauz-e-Shamsi is probably just a tiny drop on this large polygon that you see here. And then we have Jharna, which was a pretty important and very interesting addition to this landscape because uh, a Mughal courtier in the 18th century observed that there was a lot of water which was coming out of Hawaz Shamsi, especially during the rains, a lot of spillover water. And he created a picnic spot called Jharna. And further downslope, there was the Naulakha Nala. And a lot of this water flowed into Naulakha Nala, which later drained the entire area of Tughlaqabad. So the photograph that you see here, the top left, is from Sir Sayyid's famous work Asarus Sanadin, where he is said to have he has observed that this forms a beautiful lake, and the tomb of Ghiasuddin Tughlaq, which is on the lower left corner, looks like an island in the middle of this lake. And this existed. He's writing in 1840s, so this landscape supporting this flow of water from Mehrauli, which is at least 7 or 8 kilometers upstream of where Tughlaqabad is he's still able to observe it. Now we have the Mehrauli Badarpur road here, which completely bisects this watershed and also goes in between the Tughlaqabad fortress and the tomb. So Sir Sayyid is writing in 1840s, but from the Khiljis, we also moved to Tughlaqs, and in the fortress of Tughlaqabad, uh, we have at least 3 baolis. There is also a very elaborate moat system, which is an infrastructure for strengthening the security, but that also contributes to recharging your groundwater and is an important element, fluvial element, which can't be ignored. And then you had other imperial works like the baolis. So this is the famous Nizamuddin ki baoli at Nizamuddin, which still yields water for Dargah. Only a handful of these baolis remain, uh, and a lot of them have been completely filled up. And a lot of us have been to Hawaz Khas. So, as I said earlier, that there is a lot of we see a lot of continuity in the preservation of these works. So, Hawaz Khas is the construction is made by Alauddin Khilji, and later it has completely fell into disuse. And when Firoz Shah Tughlaq comes, who's very well known for his efforts to uh, make architecture of public use and public works with sarais, etc., he revives this tank, and then we know it as Hauz Khas. He also adds several buildings here, including his own tomb, and he gives it a new life. And if we had streams, then naturally it's natural to have bridges or pulls also. And this is Barapula. But this is not the real Barapula. The real Barapula is somewhat lost, although it's been cleaned up recently by the Delhi government. So this is the Barapula. On the right, what you see is Atpula. Many of you would have seen Atpula if you go to Lodi Gardens. And this is a very old photograph, I think from sometime in the 1980s or early 90s. And this is the main entrance on the right of this photograph is where you would enter Lodi Gardens from if you were coming from Khan Market. And if you closely observe, there is a sort of a dip here in the road, which signifies the presence of a stream here over which the Atpula was constructed, which we see also on this old map. Let me just. So this is the Atpula here, and this is the village of Khairpur, from which the stream is flowing, and it merges into another stream, which further goes and meets Sunehri Nala, or it is known as Barapula, and then it then flows into Yamuna. So from the Sultanate time, when we move into Shah Jahanabad, again we see plentiful of water structures of various types. The site which is chosen for building the Red Fort already had a baoli, and the fort was constructed around it. And the site for the city was also not a virgin site. You had several settlements from dating back from the Tughlaq period. You had the Kala Masjid, which was from the 14th century. And you also had several Baolis, including Khari Baoli, which does not exist anymore, but is a major CBD of the city. When Shah Jahan entered the city, he is supposed to have taken a boat to enter the city and enter the fort from what is known as the water gate. So what we have now, the ring road, and we look at Red Fort and we say this is the backside of the Red Fort. So it was not really the backside of the Red Fort. It was very much the front side where Yamuna was used for a lot of commercial purposes. Shah Jahan entered this route, and what you also see here is the Jharoka, where he would give his darshan every morning to the commons, and the space between the fort and the river was called Reti and was used for a lot of recreational activities such as elephant fights. Within Shahjahanabad, you had a lot of wells, kuas, and you also have several localities which are named after these water structures. You had Baulis, and you had the Neher, which was bringing water to the entire city. Again, continuing with the theme of how a lot of these water structures were built earlier and later revived by other rulers. The best example is actually found in Shahjahanabad, because you have one of his courtiers, a Persian courtier called Ali Wardi Khan, who revived an earlier canal which had been made by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, extended it, brought water to the city. So an important point here also to observe is that by Shahjahanabad, we are practically sitting next to the river. The image on the left shows the Red Fort, and this is the small fortress of Salimgarh, which a lot of you would have seen while going to the university or North Delhi. And this was built by Islam Shah in early 16th century. So a channel of Yamuna is actually going between dividing Salimgarh and the Red Fort. Still, the river is not really fulfilling any water needs of the city directly, because you have the wells and the baulis which are used for drinking water. The role of the river here is more for transport, and there are also other there is another opinion that the water of Yamuna even then was not fit enough for drinking, and that was the reason why Ali Wardi Khan had constructed this canal from Hisar. So it was getting Yamuna water only, but it was getting it from Hisar, where the river had an alluvial bed as compared to a quartzite bed, which we found in Delhi. So for that reason, they found the water to be potable in Hisar, and they constructed this canal. And so this is a zoomed in view of how the canal distribution worked. And this is roughly where you have the old Delhi railway station. This is the northern part of Shahjahanabad. And this is the part where you have the Yamuna, one of the branches of Yamuna flowing between Salimgarh and the Red Fort. Now, during the British Raj, what we see is that there is a different kind of control over natural resources, especially water. You also have later in the Raj in early 20th century, you have the cutting down of the ridge, especially the northern ridge where Delhi University came into being. You also have a very different planting scheme which was implemented by the British. where they introduced Prosopis juriflora, commonly known as Vilaiti kikar, which is an invasive species and destroyed a lot of flora in Delhi. And generally, the way of looking at water and the commons was very different. You also have the introduction of piped water supply, because of which a lot of these water bodies fell into disuse. And the system which had been continuing for almost 700 years, that changed. Now, what do we see now in the post-independence period? This is from a study which I was part of with GIZ and Force, where we were looking at water bodies in Delhi. So the Delhi Jal Board had listed more than 1,000 water bodies, of which a lot of these were traceable, but we found that only a handful of them, 21%, were found to be sort of, having water and clean. And I mean, it's pretty apparent from the map that maximum water bodies, which are, in some sort of, status where you can say they are wet and clean, they were in the outskirts, in the northwest and the southwest part of Delhi. But an interesting finding here was that a lot of this destruction also happens in a very planned way. So I am an urban planner, and many a times we seem to think that a lot of, these resources are destroyed because of squatting, because of squatter settlements, lower income settlements, and basically just illegal occupation of land. But one of the key findings here was that a lot of resettlement colonies which came up in the 1970s, they were located very close to these water bodies. And so this was done in a very planned kind of way, where either uh, the planning authorities completely ignored the presence of the water bodies. They did not really care about understanding their role in the larger ecosystem, or they just didn't really understand, uh, you know, their importance. And there are several examples. I'm just going to point to a few of them. As I had earlier mentioned, you had Hauz-e Shamsi, which used to occupy, I think, the entire stretch from Mehrauli to where Chhatarpur metro station and parts of Basant Kunj are at the moment, and which has now just been reduced to this tiny blue patch which you see uh, within the larger lake. So this is the case with several water bodies. Uh, Not very far from here, you also have Saket and Hauz Rani, on which a sports complex was built. So these are not kind of standalone examples. I've just taken a few of them, but you will find a lot of these examples. And I find it very interesting because if you see, and I spoke about landscape earlier, I feel that the city's entire form is fluvial in nature. It's written in water. And if you start analyzing the names of several of the urban settlements and also villages, we'll find a fluvial connection almost everywhere. So, Haus Khas, Haus Rani, Daryaganj, Talkatora, these locations have a fluvial connection of various ways. Daryaganj was located next to a river. Hauz Rani has a reservoir named after an unknown queen. Talkatora had a tal, and it's also important to see that you also have a Hauz, you also have a tal. So there is some sort of a distinction between the typology of the water bodies also. Then you have Atpula, Satpula, which was a dam constructed by Muhammad Tughlaq. And you also have a very strong connection with the Pahad or the Aravali. So you still have Paharganj, Anand Parvat, Pahadi Dheeraj. And then related to them, you also have Court, which is a small fort. And the courts would usually come up on these inselbergs or the rocky outcrops in an otherwise pretty sort of gentle landscape. So if you see the location of these you know forts like Deenpana or Humayun's capital, when you know from the zoo, when you go towards the fort, you have to climb up. So you have this landscape which gave rise to these different types of architectural elements as well. And So that's the urban part. But again, if you see the names of the villages in Delhi, so many villages we'll find which have a suffix of khadar, which is the new alluvium. So, just towards the tail end where Yamuna exits Delhi and enters Haryana, you have Uttar Pradesh, you have Madanpur Khadar. Then you also have villages which have the suffix of Bangar, which is your paleo alluvium, where the river has shifted from and found a new course, right? And you also have Sagar and you also have Dabar. So these are all uh, historical, I would say, toponyms, which tell us a lot about the geography as well as the history of the city. And slowly we have been losing them. And I feel that if we pay attention to these names, then we would be a little more cautious about what we are actually putting in place in the name of spatial development. This has an important connotation because water has a strange habit that it knows its roots. It has a memory. It tends to come back to the same places year after year. So you have this photograph of Salimgarh again. Uh, and this photograph is actually from, I think, early 20th century, where you have the railway bridge. The railway entered the city in 1870s. So you have the railway bridge, and you still have the branch of Yamuna bifurcating the fortress from the Red Fort. And this is a pretty recent photo where after the floods, you have practically the same situation. On the right is also a photograph which I need not elaborate upon. Again, a lot of you who would have known Delhi for almost 30 years. I feel the only difference here is the bus. So the old DTC bus has given way to a swanky Tata Marco Polo AC electric bus, but it still gets stuck in Minto, under the Minto Bridge. A lot of these things are happening because we have not really looked at topography. We have not looked at the toponymy, and we have uh, the arrogance of technology that come what may we can dominate environment and nature. And this is again Salimgarh. Sorry, I keep coming back to Salimgarh because it's this is from, I think, 2023 floods in July, and it's sort of very similar to 17th century. I was talking about toponymy and the importance of place names. Of late, we have seen for the last 30 years or so that we have been changing a lot of names, be it names of the cities or whosoever is in power. They want to show, that they are here, and they want to acknowledge, people that they consider important. There is also some conversation about Delhi being named in the trust. So I just want to end by saying that maybe it's not a very good idea, because these days the biggest enemy of our cities is probably Lord Indra. He is also known by another name called Purandar in our text. Purandar is a destroyer of forts or cities, and his um, he may not need to use the Vajra for destroying the cities, because, as we know, half an hour of good downpour is enough to paralyze the city life. So we have to think about what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubham. That was fascinating. Thank you for taking us through this amazing journey and story of the evolution of Delhi, and particularly focused on Shah Jahanabad, where power and legacy interventions are inseparable from the fluvial terrain and its various forms, and also how these terrains have come to be re-engineered through the years, leading us to multiple types of crises that we see in the form of recurring floods. I have a question before we open this up to the audience. In your work on developing a digital twin for Shah Jahanabad, how do you read the technology, technological interventions in the making of this digital twin, and technology which is often seen as being value neutral? How do you see what do you read as the intersections between this value neutral sort of space and this evolution of the city that you've shown us through many different kinds of you know, um, regimes, power relationships, as well as um, you know, different types of engineering and forms of development.
I don't know if I can answer this question very well because I'm still kind of exploring a lot of things about digital twins and making sort of, 3D models, etc. One of the things which fascinates me is that it gives us a tool to explore different options. If we look at the main tools that urban planners have had since the beginning of planning, as we know, is the master plan. And I often feel that when it comes to the heritage areas, the heritage districts, master plans are woefully short of what should be done. I mean, there are many examples like, let's say, the master plan of Agra from the 1970s, which is putting a lot of emphasis on industrial development. Later, we have realized that industrial development is probably not that great for city like Agra, especially because of the presence of Taj. So that sort of in this scenario, especially that sort of planning tool doesn't really work. Digital twins give you that option that what are the various scenarios that can play out. So, for example, uh, in old cities, we frequently we don't have building bylaws. A lot of our open spaces, which have existed since 17th or 18th centuries, old buildings, they have internal looking open spaces. So you don't really have setbacks, but you have open spaces as courtyards in the Havelis. Now, for whatever reason, if a Haveli is partitioned, it gets demolished. Very often we see that what is replaced, what comes up in place of that Haveli is some sort of a concrete block, right? So, and in the absence of building bylaws, there's not much you can do. So, digital twins in that sort of scenario give you the option that, okay, if you want to do this, you can do, but then let's also see what the quality of life, let's say, would be in this scenario, or this is your scenario too. So they are like a ready-made tool. They are not yet a ready-made tool, I would say, especially in the historical context. There is a lot of work which needs to be done. But when we get there, you will have some sort of a tool for planners and people who are in power decision making to sort of look at it.
Shubham, thank you for this fascinating talk. I really wish that any conversations on urban water security when it comes to actually begin with this kind of understanding about the cities. So I was enjoying the talk and I was waiting for a conclusion where you would say towards what end study. So no. One of them, not to say that I'm sure I understand what kind of inquiry that you are into, but I'm trying to sort of get you to speak to, for instance, if I have this data, and as you're an urban planner, and if I want to talk about, or otherwise you said statutory master planning, if this has to inform the master planning of Delhi 1941, right now 2041, let's say you have to give representation to the LG saying that there is some way of looking at this water security, whether it is drinking water security or coping with flood risk itself. 2024 floods, the kind of inundation that happened in Delhi. How would you take it forward? Just to share your thoughts. I mean, I'm sure you must have thought about it.
Yes, I have thought about it and I have also discussed it, and I did not probably include it here because I also have a little bit of cynicism of looking at it, how things have happened in Delhi. As I said, I grew up in this locality near Rajghat and Firozshah Kotla, and I was there in that place till around 2011-12. Before the Commonwealth Games, we had that the road which was built. So people who make the master plans, they also violate the master plans, and then you change the land use and you have these things. I'm also, as a planner, I'm not a huge fan of master plans or the framework of the master plans or the entire approach of looking at a city. I think things have changed quite a lot, and maybe we should have a rethink about the role of master plans, because it kind of it tries to predict certain things which obviously don't happen. By the time the master plan is made with the data, that data itself is old. That's one thing. Now you have a lot of technological inputs. People say drone se bana lete hain ye wo, but I mean drones are not really going to make, or high resolution satellite images are not really going to make better master plans. For that, we need some sort of common sense, and you also need, which I pointed towards earlier, you need humility. You have to understand nature. You also need to understand that there is this the theory given by Australian geographer Griffith Taylor, stop and go determinism, that you have the technology, you have all the tools, you can do whatever you want to do with nature, but there will be a time, and we don't know when that time is going to come, when it's going to take back everything from you. We have seen that in Kedarnath and several other places. So my point here about the master plans is that we have to look at city as an organism. We have to see that we have to have some sort of a loose structure. I'm not saying that we don't need, that we have to do away with planning. We need to have some sort of a loose structure about the general city. What we need to be very protective or zealous about is our greens and our blues, which does not really happen in any master plan document. So, if we can sort of say that this is the river, or this is a lake, and this is the area that we are going to protect zealously. We are going to make sure that nothing really comes up here. So we have to have that sort of approach. For that, another thing which is important is to let the water bodies just be. When we talk about, and you would have seen in many planning documents that when we are talking about any water body, there is so much emphasis on beautification. In Hindi, we say saundaryakaran. Okay, so you add some sort of a walkway around it. Okay, okay. Because I mean, saundaryakaran is a very artificial term, which I see in a lot of Hindi planning documents. But there is so much emphasis on creating a riverfront. Okay, and we don't need that. Yamuna has a stretch of almost 22 kilometers when it enters Delhi near Jagatpur. And if you, even now, especially after the monsoons, not now, you go to Jagatpur, you will see a beautiful river. And when you reach Wazirabad Barrage, where you have the water which has been, uh, stopped for the supply, and then you have the Najafgarh drain. That's a very telling picture. So, and then of course you have barrages, and then suddenly somebody comes up that we are going to make a riverfront here, and so a lot of these things happen without really understanding the micro histories and the geographies. And if you were to walk next to the river, which again is a pretty impossible task these days, because in many places you will not know how to get down to the river. You will not even see the river in many places, even when you are crossing the river. So all these things are sort of important. The other point which I have not really mentioned here is which was part of the work which I did with GIZ in Force in 2015. The project was called Sanitation Beyond Sewers. So it's also important to look at water supply and sanitation together. There is a lot of emphasis on laying down sewerage network, which is a way, I'm not against it, but we have to, in this day and age, with so much technology and digital twins and whatnot, we have to look at a basket of solutions. Master plans, and I mean, they generally don't look at all these different solutions. So unless we have that sort of a comprehensive approach, we will not be able to do anything about fresh water or black water. I spoke about the nalas. We all know a lot of these nalas are still there. And there have been, again, numerous proposals which are pretty cost effective, which use, propose technologies like bioremediation, micro STPs to clean the nalas. But every new government which comes has this, you know, this confidence or overconfidence that we will clean Yamuna. And that's not going to happen. What we can probably do is evolve a strategy of not polluting it further. And that will happen when we look at some of these micro strategies. Look at the nalas, not cover them up with concrete and make Delhi Hearts, or I mean Delhi Heart is still okay, but if you go to Defense Colony or you go to Greater Kailash, uh, you will partly see the nala. You will see part of it completely covered with concrete. The stench doesn't go away. The only way to do it is treat it and make sure that whatever pollutants are emptying in the Yamuna, that load has been reduced. So we need that sort of a comprehensive strategy. Areas which are not sewered, you can find, I mean, you can have a sewerage master plan or whatever, but then you also need to have some other strategies. And, you can't have your Lakeview apartments if there is no lake. So you need to have, you need to recognize the water bodies. When I was working on this project in 2015, we only had the point data and we did not have the time to actually go and do ground truthing to see what was the extent of these water bodies. I'm told that the previous Delhi government did do the spatial mapping, but I have not seen that data. So how many of these 1,000 whatever water bodies are actually there? We have to see, and then again, how do we protect them? So I'm sorry I did not include it because of this very fact.
Thank you, Shubham. We also have online, we have Professor Sridharan, who, since we're discussing planning, and Professor Sridharan was former Dean of the School of Planning and Architecture in Bhopal. Could I request Professor Sridharan to please join this conversation? Professor Sridharan, we'd like to bring you on board. Let me just enable that.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful to have you here with us.
Yeah.
Professor Sridharan, over to
Thank you very much for after a long time you are reconnecting. Okay.
Yes.
It's a very good presentation when I go into the whole history of it. Whatever as a student of planning, I mean, I could recap most of the things, and beyond that also you went into that. Okay, that's very good, Shubham, that to go into this.
Thank you, sir.
The point which I was looking for, probably you're also going into this mode of Duran 1, 2, 3 phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Because I was looking for hill, forest, and river. Okay, you put everything together, but the thing is how the Tiberius, as one of the person also raised that issue. Okay, what you talk about that whether you capture the past as well as the present. Okay, how that link is still missing. One thing which I'm trying to look into that. Secondly, even in that old city, the whole the entire city map, if we see into that, say for example Najafgarh drain, that also propels some of that, especially in terms of what do you call non-planned cities and all along the route, as well as we have now coming up with Dwarka as a tech city and all the things coming up in the simultaneously. So how do you relate these two? Like one side is the Najafgarh, one side is the other side, which comes from that Qutub Minar. It comes up in that Parapula. That is another one. So how these two comes into and to change up the whole thing of the Jamuna. Okay, and how this is still we are abusing or taking that water for our drinking along with the Ganges. Okay, that is one. You rightly pointed out the arrogance of technology. I also can use the word of this arrogance of master plan also there. Okay, because right from 1968 as well as in 1980s onwards, okay, PWD of Delhi also came out with a plan for the entire thing under the Yamuna Action Plan, funded by the Japanese government. Oh, when that happens, also that's also in a project approach. There is no master plan. There's only a map, various individual projects which have been come into different drains. Okay. Now, how do you link these two together under the master plan? Can we link it, integrate the master plan? We cannot. I mean, you cannot come out with an alternative for the master plan for the time being because still it's being uh, involved. So, how do you integrate separate? Like, say, if you go to Shanghai, they have almost like a ton master plans put together as integrated planning. So, can we think of something like that? And also, like as I said, Durand 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you come out with that various stories? Not your, especially the second phase and the third phase of the city. Okay, because we come out with the third master plan, fourth master plan. How it is get reflected into this? I think somewhere you have to so-called twinning, which you talk about digitally. I'm also thinking in terms of how we are not even evaluating that master plan. Forget about that other thing. Okay, we never master plan has never been evaluated. Then only we'll know what is the situation. None of the master plans across India, same thing happened. Okay, so thank you for giving me a chance to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Professor Sridharan.
Okay, so I think a lot of questions here, but evaluation is certainly important, and what I also feel is probably it's important to uh, again put the landscape or nature in the center of the planning process. Also evaluate the carrying capacity. I remember in a CPR workshop only, I think back in 2010 or 11, and it took place in SPA. We spoke quite a lot about how cities are using resources from their hinterland. And I mean, Delhi gets its drinking water from various places. Most of the cities, mega cities that you look at, are getting water from hundreds of kilometers away. So, master plans are generally looking at that this is the current population by various methods. By 2041, we'll have so many people, and we have to fulfill these needs. And this is where we are going to get water from, or whatever. So, we have to evaluate that process and see how we can be the cities can be basically a little more self-sufficient in the resource use. And another thing which I feel which I pointed to not very explicitly though was the lack of understanding of the watershed. A lot of planning happens as if there has been sort of no history of how water bodies came up. uh, we have to understand that a lot of these water bodies were engineered. So when we look at, I did not really go into the details of each and every water body, but if you were to do it, there were marvelous pieces of both architecture and engineering. A lot of these dams that we see, which are still standing today, uh, so the fact that they are still standing there, that points to their engineering, but it also points to the fact that they were designed to catch each and every drop that was falling in that catchment, because they had to fulfill the needs of the city. So in the modern paradigm, I very often see that that is completely missing. The approach of starting from understanding the watershed of a city and the micro watersheds there, we don't really see them. So you have a situation where there is a lot of effort in reviving the old water structures, and I'm not saying it's not been done, but you have a situation where you architecturally or structurally clean a water body and then you put treated sewage in it. So I'm not very sure that I like that approach. And that happens because uh, we have never cared to study the underlying channels which would have been feeding water to that baoli or a lake. And though they are gone, and then we sort of try these methods. So I'm not sure if I have answered all the questions, but these are some of my thoughts on what Professor Sridharan had raised.
There's another question here from my colleague Arkaja Singh. And then we'll take some online questions again.
Yeah. So Shubham, thanks for your really fascinating presentation. It's really interesting. I have two kind of points of questions. One is the landscapes that you're talking of, but also engineered spaces in some ways, right? The baolis, the canals, the layers and layers of human intervention in making the landscape optimal. And then there is some point of kind of change that you're talking about, where we have a master planning approach or an engineering approach, I would say more broadly, which is kind of blind to the ecology, or more is possible in engineering and therefore you need to do less locally. There is some change that you're referring to, right? And some point of disjuncture that you're referring to. And I was wondering if you could historicize that a bit and put that in some kind of larger context of cities and modern cities or the imagination of modern cities. That's one question. And the other, which is, there's a type of like historical determinism that there were previous layers of of engineering, of human intervention in making these landscapes, in making landscapes habitable, right? Which there is a point, and then there is most of the halls is now covered with habitation. And like lots of things have changed. Some of those could have perhaps been avoided, some of those, but this is where we are now.
Yeah.
So in that kind of historically cities had to live within their resources. And not even, because historically they built channels and canals to bring water from far out places to serve city needs or to serve agriculture like that. So, the claim that cities have to live within their resources is something that I'd like to question a bit. I don't think they necessarily have to, ecological resilience should be a wider concept than historical determinants.
Well, yeah, historically, I mean, I did speak about how Firoz Shah Tughlaq also brought in water from Hisar, and then that system was later revived. So, yes, they have brought in resources, and wherever they felt they were deficient. From whatever I have read so far and spoken to people and, done this work, my understanding basically is that there is still some sort of reverence towards ecology and nature, which has kind of created self-imposed boundaries, that where are you going to, how much you're going to use, how much you're going to exploit. And we are also talking about an era where the technology is also, tools are not that sort of dominant, and you neither have, they did not have those sort of engineering tools, so they probably also did not know. But I am, I would still say that they still had a lot of reverence for ecology, and then you would find in across spaces and religions. You will always associate some sort of a reverent point of view to, especially to water bodies, and that was across religions. That is something which has changed, and I think to answer your first question also, we see that especially during the British times, and I think you will find a similar pattern in other urban settlements also, other cities in India also, where there is this sort of disconnect of how uh, you know Indians are looking at these resources and water bodies as compared to when the British come, how they start looking at it. They are looking at it in a different way, and also I think there is some sort of a disconnect in how they that there is a little bit of lack of understanding of this relationship between uh, if I can say, the natives and the resources. So that is something which sort of changes quite a bit. And from there again you have the post-independence period, uh, I wouldn't say that immediately after post-independence you have this disconnect started happening slowly, because I have certain photographs and I have also been to these sites as late as early 90s, and a lot of these baolis are still in working conditions. Okay, so if you go to Mehrauli, there are 3 baolis here. You go to Ugrasen ki baoli, they still had water, and the water was being used for various purposes. But I mean, I have not done that kind of work, but it would be very interesting to see spatial development across, some sort of a buffer zone around water bodies immediately after partition, especially in Delhi when you have the new settlements which are coming up. Then in the master plan, after the master plans come into being, and post liberalization, what is happening. So I've not done that work, but it would be interesting to see how things are changing. Is there a pattern? Is there a change of pace of their deterioration?
In relation to Arkaja's second question, which is also you invoked,
The historical determinism.
historical determinism, resilience,
Yeah.
and the more content current, interconnections of how we deal with development and fluvial terrains. There's another question online here. Minati Dash, who says, hi Shubham, I really enjoyed the lecture. I have a question. How do you see what you term technological arrogance, marrying climate resilient cities, leading to abrogation of traditional and in many cases more formal rights of communities along the floodplains in Delhi? Sort of relates to environment, to historical determinism in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just I mean, there are obviously two sides to it. Again, historically, and sort of going back to the ITO of 90s, if you were to cross the Yamuna, you had this very interesting signboard there just as you cross the bridge. Yahan hathi rehte hain. So just if you were to go down to the river bank, there was a colony of the Hathiwalas, and as far as I can remember, they were evicted from there sometime in 2006, 2007, and they were given land in Sangam Vihar. Uh, the Hathiwalas used to stay there. The Mahouts used to stay there because the elephants required a particular kind of grass which grew only in the floodplains. So I don't know really. I don't really know how to answer this because, I mean, of course, you have flooding, and we see how a lot of people have to shift. But at the same time, a lot of these communities have lived next to the river, not just in Delhi, but in many other places. And also, I mean, I'm not really an expert on this, but again, historically, there a lot of these communities they knew how to live with, let's say, floods. So there was, I mean, I'm not really glorifying that they had to move from place to place, but the situation was different. They knew how to kind of uh, live with it because they also knew that floods bring alluvium, which is good for agriculture, which they were practicing. So, I mean, one way of looking at their rights and why I brought this the example of the Hathiwala is because we had this conversation with them as part of a program called Yamuna Katha, where we were looking at the communities and people who were related with the river in different ways. So, academicians, urban planners, designers, architects, and also people, fishermen, the fisher folks, the Mahouts. And what they said was that generally in the planning process, so you have, the planning documents which are displayed, and then you have public meetings and all. They were not really kind of heard. Their points of views were never heard. And the fact that nobody really looked into what their needs were. When they were relocated to Sangam Bihar, where it was just very difficult for their way of life.
And suppose the relationship between water settlement and urbanization itself have changed over a period of time. That's what
Yeah.
sharing. There's another question which is on anonymous attendee who says, "Thank you for your talk. I was intrigued by your observation that piped water supply destroyed the water bodies. Could you say more about this process? Specifically, how does this happen? And given your emphasis on greens and blues, how can these water bodies be preserved?"
So, because of piped water supply, a lot of the traditional water systems fell into disuse. And once they were in disuse, so I mean, they were destroyed. That has been the case in many cities, which I have not seen. I mean, this happened way back when the pipe water supply was introduced. But I have seen similar examples in certain rural communities, especially in Western Rajasthan, where not necessarily pipe water supply, but promises were made that we'll bring, Ganga waters using a canal, or we'll put hand pumps. And a lot of these communities, which were kind of living uh, using, they were primarily into, you know, uh, I mean, they were basically looking at this fragile ecosystem of Western Rajasthan, and they were very conscious of the resource use. They had different, very sophisticated systems of water. They have in Western Rajasthan, where you get something like 7 or 8 inches of rainfall. So you have very small wells, which are called baolis or kui, and they are generally made in places where you have an underlying gypsum belt. So in geography in school, we are generally taught that you have groundwater and you have surface water. They have a third system of water which they call Rejwani Pani. Rejwani Pani is basically moisture which collects after rainfall, and slowly it percolates from the sand, and it forms a water column above this gypsum belt. And so therefore your body is very small in diameter, maybe just 1 meter, 1.5 meters, so that the water column forms, and then you can lift the water up, using a bucket. So a lot of these systems were also fell into disuse, because people were promised that you will have water from the canal for irrigation. You will also have hand pumps. Now nobody really cared to find out that if you have to install a hand pump, what is the groundwater situation there, because the system of berries is very different from groundwater. We are not talking about an aquifer as such. We're talking about just a gypsum belt which stores moisture and a water column forms. So again, what I want to emphasize is that this arrogance of technology, and also this arrogance of knowledge, and this complete lack of kind of respect towards some of these traditional systems or traditional knowledge, has brought us to this situation.
There are more questions on infrastructure, so it might make sense for us to take some of these together. Further down, there's an anonymous attendee again who says, "Is Delhi's ecological stress and regressive infrastructure severely impacting public health in any particular way, apart from climate change induced challenges?" That's one, and there's one more further down. We can take that next, perhaps.
Delhi's infrastructure.
So is Delhi's ecological stress and regressive infrastructure severely impacting public health in any particular way, apart from climate change induced challenges? Regressive infrastructure in your case, how would you interpret that?
I mean, regressive infrastructure in the sense, as I pointed out, when it comes to stormwater systems, there is again a lot of, especially before the monsoons, there is a lot of, emphasis on cleaning up your drains so that the roads don't flood, etc., etc. But I mean, we have to do those things. You have stormwater drains, so you have to clean them. But the bigger thing here is that we have to have water bodies in the city, and water bodies which we just let them be. We don't really sort of go into a lot of beautification, or because these systems play several roles. You have heat stress, you have urban heat islands. For that you need your greens and blues. You have urban flooding. Again, with an organization called Seeds, we had done a study on urban floods, and what we found was that there was no most of the smart cities which were being made at that time, out of 120, I think 100 or 110 were in these flood-prone districts. So water bodies play that role of regulating your floods, also recharging the groundwater. So infrastructure is fine at one end, but we have to look at these larger things, which happen slowly, and then they, they follow a very gradual process. As far as other infrastructure like sewerage, etc., is concerned, we again have to look at a basket of solutions. I'm not very sure about the statistics now, but a decade or so earlier, Delhi was around 55% sewered. So there are large parts of the NCT which are not sewered. And when you go to smaller cities, the percentage would go down. So what do we do in this situation? Because we also know that you don't have that sort of money in the urban local bodies to lay down expansive sewerage systems, because the rate of growth of a city as compared to how much time it will take, that also doesn't go together. So again, we have to look at infrastructure also in a way that what are the different ways that can be merged together. If you have sewerage system, can we also have DWATs in certain places? Can we also have FSTPs in certain places? How do they go together in terms of the socio-economic outlook of the city, the topographic outlook of the city, and other things?
That probably also responds to a question here by Paritosh Tyagi, who says, how can entry of wastewater and sewage be prevented from entering the young one?
So I think I pointed out that there are various proposals about these nalas. How do you clean them up? And in many ways they are much cheaper as compared to installing STPs.
There's more questions. There are more questions on planning again. Sonali Chauhan says, hi, since we're talking about plans and mapping, I would like to know your thoughts on the feasibility of biotope mapping for Indian cities. I know it is popularized by German planners and ecologists, but can we have something like that for Indian planning landscapes?
Certainly can be looked into. I'm not sure. Biotope planning. It would be fascinating to look into it. See, again, maybe I am a little bit of a traditionalist, and I see a lot of these terms. There is also a term which has been around since COVID times, developing a sponge city. And a lot of our cities have been sponge cities. We have moved away from that. So, I mean, it's always very good to borrow certain ideas, learn from other places, but it's also important to just see what we were doing, and maybe a lot of these things were correct.
Sure, and reflect back on older practices. There's a question here in the audience. Yes, please.
Hi, Shubham, thanks for a very fascinating presentation. Learned a lot more about my city. I was born here, I'm still here. Some of the things that sometimes come up, there is a notion that these cities of the past in this particular geography were more sustainable, harmonious. I'm not quite sure if that's really the case because I'm not an urban planner. So I was wanting to hear from an expert as to whether that particular context is actually true, that cities of the past were more harmonious. The second thing that comes up is that obviously it's an interplay between man and the topography, and I think you described it so well in terms of the hills, the forests, and the river. But there's another aspect to it, which is the interplay between people. And one of the things that we see in most urban areas, given that development is something that is somewhat unequal across the country, that there is a tendency for migration towards urban areas. And that's obviously one of the bigger pressures that many of these cities face. So there are two questions in that particular context. The first is, are there some holy cows that you should have, that these should not be violated as you go ahead with the process of urban planning and urban management? And the second is, if population is really going to be a pressure that you cannot deal with continuously over a longer period of time, and I think if you look at some of the great cities of the West, which are, of course, in a slightly different context, but their core cities have broadly remained constant in terms of their population over centuries, actually. So is there a logic in saying that there should be an urban tax if you want to come in, whether as a formal resident of the city of Delhi, let us say, or as an informal resident, there should actually be a city tax that you should pay. Otherwise, you cannot enter because you cannot sustain more than X billion people. Thank you.
I mean, that sort of a thing would first lead us to this question that who's a resident of Delhi in Delhi's case. And my friend Puneet is here, who's from Deoli Gaon. And I mean, most of us are migrants to Delhi at different points in time. So if you were to take out all of us, then we will basically be left with certain villages of different communities. So I mean, I don't really know of that sort of a urban tax. The other thing, again, which is very interesting that you pointed out to was the constant influx of people uh, coming from. I mean, I'm slightly going in a different direction, but what I also feel is that as planners, again, what we have failed to understand is uh, the regional or the rural context in many ways. The example which I gave about Rajasthan, and I have seen this in several places, especially in Western Rajasthan as well as in areas in eastern parts such as Jaipur, Alwar, etc., where a lot of these, you know, age-old, time-tested practices, especially around water, we have not been able to understand, or we have not made any effort to understand, and we have imposed various technological solutions. And when these technological solutions have not worked, then you have had situations of drought, where then you have had situations where people are moving out. They may have come off, they may have been pretty well off in certain times, but when certain promises are made, they have not been carried forward. That also results in a lot of migration. And then what you see is people who were pretty okay, they were doing okay in a rural scenario, they come to a city and they end up in a slum-like situation. So we have to have that larger context. We have to have that wider understanding. And again, I go back to this word, we have to have that respect and humility to understand this before we start kind of drawing plans for cities. What was the first question? I'm sorry, I missed it.
The other was about, are there some some certain things that are so sacred that every town planner should insist upon that this cannot be violated? Of course, I know it's very difficult to have laws in this country because everything is a suggestion, but within that framework, are there things that you should say, do not violate this water body or this topography or certain other things? If so, what would those be?
I don't think there's any straight answer to it. As far as I said earlier, as far as possible, protect your greens and water bodies. But again, we have such cultural practices. There was a question about that also. So, I mean, we are looking at climate resilient cities, and we are also looking at traditional rights of people. So, some sort of balance has to be found out.
Yeah, more questions. Planning norms and principles that one needs to sort of be cognizant of. There's a question again by Minati Dash, who says, secondly, most planning since the Poco period has been centered on society-nature dichotomy. With fragmented ecosystems, planning impetus driven very little by ecological systems, yet increasing realization that cities are crumbling in holding together in the face of climate change impacts. How do you see this play out in Delhi?
I mean, it's sort of there in I think in various ways. So I think there was an earlier question about biotope or something. So which reminds me of looking at certain Western examples that uh, about this, looking at nature especially, and there are various examples where uh, because of increase in traffic, you have either pedestrianized a zone or you have completely converted into some sort of a green way. Here we are still thinking of making more flyovers. We are looking at um, increasing the right of way to have more uh, private cars. So this is just one example, but I mean the situation in that sense is pretty grim because we are not uh, giving primacy to the ecology.
This sort of reminds me also of planning processes in Colombia, where a student of mine was in fact sharing with me that all their master plans and their strategic plans for the city of Bogota have to be approved ultimately by the environment department. If the environment department does not clear their plans, then their plans don't go through. That's the level of significance and importance that cities which care for the environment actually have in terms of their planning processes. And that's sort of used to what you're referring to, Shubham. There's a question by Abhishek Malhotra. Abhishek Malhotra, you could also join us online to share your question if you'd like to.
Hi, Shubham. Thank you for such an amazing talk. Really got fascinated to see how water can also shape the master plan. And when it's about Delhi, it's really fascinating to see all your research. It's just a curious question from my side. Just want to know your opinion. Do you think that this water ecosystem of Delhi can be revived? Like, can Yamuna be restored to its original form? We see a lot of plans being formulated and executed, but um, nothing on ground in terms of actual results. So what's your opinion on that? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think we all know that it can't be fully revived, and whatever that definition of 100% of full is. Also, you can, I think, only look at a river. You can't really do much about the state of Yamuna as it is now, which basically means that we have to have a certain amount of water flow in it, to be recognized as a river. So unless we do it, of course, with a lot of water bodies, I don't think we can do much. Uh, they are sort of damaged beyond repair for various reasons. Some of these I have pointed out earlier that we have not really understood these systems. We have not really understood the watershed, or we have not understood the underground geology, which is or geomorphology, which has sustained these systems. So in that absence has taken place, if we start recognizing some of these things, then as I pointed out earlier, from the data that we have, you still have a lot of these systems which are part of a larger system which remain untouched. So that's the only probably way you can do. uh, of course, you still have technology which can be put to good use, and some of these nalas, etc., uh, they can be improved to a certain extent, which will definitely have a bearing on the water quality in the larger river. If we start looking at river first, which a lot of governments tend to do, then I don't think we can achieve much. Thank you.
Yes.
One follow-on point, and I think it's come up in many of the comments as well. Like I think the problem of historical determinism, like what does it mean to revive the Yamuna to its original form? And is that the only, and water bodies can damage beyond repair? Now, we are where we are.
Yeah.
Right? So the question, and there is a kind of, underlying kind of imagined conflict between people and nature that exists, this understanding of water bodies, which I just feel like one could go beyond that. There is a possibility of going beyond that. So, there is a kind of imagined history or a real history, but a history that one goes back. Understanding that history is important. But revival doesn't necessarily mean going back to a historical point. But coming to a point of where it's ecologically viable, where the Yamuna exists in a, whatever, and I feel like our regulatory imagination, our legal imagination, because the Yamuna is so heavily litigated as well, so therefore the legal imagination becomes a little relevant here also, it doesn't really go into imagining what an ecological understanding of water bodies or cities and water systems and kind of the river and its ecology it could be without just going back to this was its original point.
Yeah, I mean,
we're not able to look in a forward way and in a way that goes past the the obvious conflicts of let us remove this slum because it's on the banks of the Yamuna. That's the way of these people are all encroachers around this water body. Let's remove all of that. That's the only lens through which this is conceived.
no, yeah, I agree with it. And also, when it comes to revival, and I mean, what is the starting point that you're going to look at historically? I mean, we don't know that. And I mean, we can't even determine that. So, looking at these water bodies, you basically have to, in my opinion, you have to see how sort of what is the viability, where it starts existing. Right now, it's basically a drain which has been stopped at various points. So how do you maintain kind of flow which allows it to be called a river? And I mean, it probably you can also what you were saying. You can also
regulatory management. In the litigations or in what the environmental regulatory agencies do, we have no imagination of what viability could be.
Yeah, but again, I think you can also extend it to what the Supreme Court said about the Aravalis. So, that beyond a certain height, it's, this is a hill and this is not a hill. So we also need to have, a broader understanding, and the regulatory mechanisms can't kind of straitjacket some of these things. But at the same time, I agree with you that we can't kind of go to some sort of a historical point, because it's an endless process, and it's going to be counterproductive.
But also, on that note, I wanted to share some regulatory ambivalences from the context of Bangalore, which is pertaining to all the lakes and watersheds that have got built over the period of the last 30 years, particularly. In terms of regulatory conditions, we have stipulations from the National Green Tribunal to the state government to the master plan for the city, and these ambiguities across, there are multiple legal regulatory orders which are prevailing at the same time, which cause a lot of potential for different kinds of violations to actually take place. But the question of encroachment is not very easy to determine either, because there's so many regulatory orders that exist at the same time.
As you mentioned, a lot of the violations are planned. They are brought by statute.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
So I just looked at the what is the river and what is the viable. I just looked at the internet, and for Jamuna, this is 10 cubic meters per second. That's the minimum flow required. Just a piece of information for you. So there are standards which decide what would be called a viable river. We will never go back in time. I think historically it's not possible. But we can go back to preserving that much flow of water in there. That's the minimum. But my question,
Which might only reinforces the point that a 10 cubic meters per second or whatever, it cannot be the only condition. There's a full riverine ecosystem.
no. But John, not that is the flow required, minimum flow to call it a river. Otherwise, it won't be. But the entire river system, there would be a whole river basin management plan that would define it. So there are standards, there are regulatory framework, we can discuss it, but it is not related to Shubham's presentation. So let's stick to it. So Shubham, coming back to your work, very interesting, very detailed work. You talked about what is in Delhi. But to me, it seems it's a part of a piece of larger work. And perhaps you have not shared other information. So to us, and there are some questions which come
Okay.
with the objective of your studies, part of thesis, isn't it?
Actually, it's not.
It's not.
No.
Okay.
It's completely different.
Huh.
It in a way is just because my thesis is should I say talking about it or okay, let me please finish.
So, what was the purpose of doing this work? Why were you doing? Was it a project? And what was the major question that drove you to take up this work? And have you found the answer? This is one. But doing this kind of thorough research that you have done also has some practical value. And it should help to improve the system. So, are there any such recommendations that you could put at the table? So, what were your key questions? Why did you do this work? What were your key questions? And are there any recommendations, suggestions which would improve the system, water system in Delhi?
Okay.
Big question.
Okay, so firstly, it's not really related to the PhD which I'm pursuing right now. My PhD is more or less solely focused on Shahjahanabad, where I'm looking at the evolution of the city from 1638 to now. And I'm creating a digital twin. So it's basically a 3D model which I'm trying to create from 1638 to now in various stages. And one of the things which I'm looking at is the methodology, because unlike a lot of European cities, we don't have really detailed or good spatial data going back to mid 17th century. We'll find a lot of cities in Europe and France where they have maps from even from 16th century. For Shahjahanabad, we don't have. For Shahjahanabad, we have a very detailed map on which Dr. Swapna Little's latest book is based, Shahjahanabad Mapping the Mughal City, which is from 1846. So I'm going back to 1638 when you just had few settlements, a couple of mosques, and then Shah Jahan comes and he decides to make the city. So I'm making a 3D model, and as I mentioned that I hope to develop some sort of a tool which will at least at a neighborhood or a smaller level in the city, which would be a detailed 3D model, and it would help in certain decision in decision making for the planners, etc. That what sort of development, or it will just basically give us options. So I mean that is a very different work, but some of the things which kind of generated spatial data from this work, because ultimately Shahjahanabad is also located in the same triangle, it might feed into it. As far as the starting point of this work is concerned, what I said in the presentation, that's absolutely true, and I stick to it, that it just started with this fascination of imagining the landscape without the interventions which had taken place over the years. So I just wanted to kind of imagine. So as a child, I had lived almost practically next to the Yamuna, and then I had known about this pahadi called the Ridge, and then during my visits to the Delhi University, where I studied for 5 years, and the southern part of the city also, I sort of recognized that okay, the ridge is broken. So how has that happened? And then I spoke to people, and then they talked about encroachments and other things. So it was only to understand that what the landscape would have been like in early 20th century, before a lot of these interventions, New Delhi, post-independence growth of Delhi took place, what this the virgin landscape might have looked like. So that was my sole interest. And as I said, a lot of these things were driven by visualization. My key interest, even when I'm doing my PhD research, uh, of course, I want to use it for some sort of a planning purpose, but I'm driven more by the the visualization of that part of the city. So the idea was to visualize the landscape and then these various streams and their connection with the Yamuna. That was the starting point, and then I wanted to understand that, okay, so you have, Delhi, a tale of seven cities, whatever, how these settlements came up in between. And I mean, since my father worked on water, and in Rajasthan, I was fascinated with those sort of stories, but I also wanted to see that happening in Delhi because I was born and brought up here. Uh, Recommendations, I don't know, in the sense that I'm not sure if a lot of it can get implemented, because a lot of these recommendations, again, as I said, you have these nalas which have completely gone, they've become nalas from freshwater streams. And a lot of people have spoken about cost-effective ways of reviving them, of cleaning them. So I'm not giving any new proposal. These proposals already exist. But for some reason, they have people, I mean, nobody has really, tried to implement them. It has happened in very small patches, but largely it has not happened. So I don't have any new recommendation. The only, I mean, the larger recommendation which I keep coming to is that there are things that we can learn from the past. And I'm not really glorifying, or I'm not saying the earlier cities were more harmonious. They had their own set of issues. But then there were certain things which which sustained them. And one of my, I mean, sort of pet peeves with planners is that we are not trained in history at all. When we are taught urban planning, we are always kind of, taught to look into the future, give a perspective. But you can't really do that without really understanding what existed there. And I'm saying it not just from kind of, I'm saying that don't even go as far as looking at the old plan or an old map. Just try and understand the place names, and it will give you a clue of what the terrain was. And terrain plays an important role in sort of determining, even with technology, without technology, what comes there. So all I'm trying to say, especially to planners, is just try and see what existed. Maybe it's not of any use, of any importance, then just scrap it and move ahead. But don't do it without spending that tiny amount of time. That's all I want to say.
That's very important, I think. Yeah, it's beautiful also because taxonomy itself has, clues to offer. That's a fantastic part. That's some thoughts to share.
Thanks, Shubham. I just put forward a few propositions for you to respond to see whether we are understanding you appropriately. But first a question and then the proposition. The first one is, in trying to think through whether or not the possibility of whether, as you said, turning nalas back into rivers, structures, etc. I was wondering whether the other of your three elements that sort of defined your talk, the hill, the forest, and the river, talked a lot about the river,
Yeah,
and less about the hill and the forest. I was just wondering how that fed into the river story, the extent to which you see the change in that part of the ridge. To some extent is preserved, but the others, maybe the forest topography has changed, and how that sort of affects runoff, groundwater structures, etc. And whether that is, I'm not asking you to get into that right now, just asking you whether that is an area that you're also looking at as part of this project. The second, and this I think is the most sort of policy oriented bit of what I heard. And it is a complicated one, which is at different points in time, it felt as if you were relatively reluctant to have people engage with these spaces. The sense that creating, as you said, walks around or cycle paths or structures, etc., could perhaps lead to more damage than to actual revival or something. And that's an argument that's sort of similar to when you do forest management between reserve forests and national parks, and how do you sort of engage what levels of human interaction are feasible in what spaces with what kind of thing, and how does that sort of just the presence of human intervention sort of then affects the natural environment. At the same time, there is also the fact that to the extent that people engage with, and this is the whole national park story, which is to the extent that people actually engage with nature, there is a higher interest in preserving it, keeping it there in a particular way. And I was curious about where your thoughts came out on that balance between, and this comes out more starkly, I think, in most cities as to whether our cities have faced the river or turned away from it. As you said, Piche Wali or Samne Wali. And if you're facing and engaging with the river, and today I go to Kolkata and I see a lot more engagement with the Hooghly on both sides in some sense, as opposed to, if I'm looking at Delhi, is almost nothing along the Yamuna that actually sort of perhaps now the Akshardham and a couple of other things, etc. But even so, not so much. For natural reasons, you don't particularly want to face them at this point in time. But I'm just curious about how there's just a facile example, but how do you see that balance between engaging, and does it help or does it hurt in balance, right? The third is the peculiar position of Delhi, and you mentioned among the various aspects, the fact that the ruler is an important part of what makes a city happen. And I'm wondering whether the fact that Delhi is the capital then sort of affects how we have managed. Because today we get our water all the way from Renuka and further beyond. So we just reach into further and further. I mean, essentially as if all of India's resources are available to the city because it is the capital. And then it goes back to what Sanjay was asking as to, is there a carrying capacity for this particular space? And I said, well, not really, because more people come here, we just get deprive somebody in Sharanpur or somebody in Himachal or somebody else and make this place work. So if Delhi was not the capital, do you think you'd have seen a different outcome in some respect, right? And finally, what I found most striking about your description is usually in the discourse when we think about why these kinds of ecological problems happen, and I think what Arpija spoke about in terms of the legal narrative is important, is that most of it has largely been with a variety of quote-unquote the underclass, sort of being too much slums settling on grounds, the Yamuna Pushka being a prime example, but also everywhere else along the Najafgarh, untreated sewage moving into structures because none of them are sewered, all sort of have, they don't have proper sanitation structures, etc., informal settlements. A lot of this untreated stuff is essentially originating from informal settlements, etc., which is why we have this stuff. And if I look at the way you've presented this stuff, a lot of the disappearance of these natural water bodies or shrinking of them is largely because of formal interventions. And you see that in many other cities, whether you're looking at Masab Kang, and therefore, in some sense, what you're just saying that the opacity or the ignorance of the planning to the existing sort of ecological channels, so to speak, is of the existing ecosystem, is perhaps much more responsible than sort of these flows, and that balance between how much is caused by quote unquote the informal settler and the slum dweller and the poor versus how much is caused by the rich. And that's the second sort of tension I was asking you to sort of think. And whether you wish to your thoughts on characterizing what you're doing in that frame. So those 4 observations, I was just wondering how you would react.
Okay, so yeah, the hill and the forest is somewhat missing right now, but as I also said, it's a work in progress. A lot of time I spent in looking at especially the contours of the landscape from early 20th century, and they've not been very easy to find. I mean, about the data and observation which I have had is we see a lot of maps from early 20th century which give a very good picture of the ridge, but somehow they all end at what is south extension today. So the British surveyors, for a lot of reasons, they did not really give us good survey drawings of areas beyond south extension and basically that edge. So I have recently found maps from early 20th century, 1909, 1910, which also gave us the topography of the southern part of the ridge, Tughlaqabad and beyond. So slowly I'm going to, it takes a lot of time and kind of, visualizing it as a digital elevation model and then, putting the water features on it. So that will happen, but it will take more time. The forest is also pretty kind of complicated in the sense that I briefly mentioned the introduction of Prosopis juliflora as a species, which is an invasive species and which has kind of eaten up other native species. And in certain areas in Delhi, a lot of experiments have been done and a lot of native species have been planted now. But there is also a view that Delhi was not as humid as it is now because a lot of forestation which has happened in starting with the early 20th century. So how are we looking at it? I mean, we're looking at urban heat islands and other things, but at the same time, we're also saying that a lot of this forestation has also changed the basic character of heat in Delhi. So at the moment, I have not really sort of looked at it in greater detail, but that will happen later. What were the other questions? Sorry.
There's so Partho's second question was about that.
Oh, okay. The engagement, right? So I'm sorry if it sort of came out that I'm against people's engagement or connection. In fact, again, when I was doing this program called Yamuna Katha, it started with this observation that there are various cities, and Kolkata being one of them, which are known by the river. I mean, you can't really separate. There is a dyad between the city and the river, and you can't really separate the city, be it Kolkata, be it Varanasi, even Kanpur, Jabalpur with Narmada and so on. In Delhi, it's sort of for the Delhiite, I think it's missing. As I said, I spent almost 30 years living within a kilometer of 2 of Yamuna. But there would have been a handful of occasions where I would have actually gone down to the banks. I don't remember it. Also, so many of us use all these bridges to cross into what is Jamna Par. But when you do it, you don't really see the river. So it has been kind of, I'm not saying that it's by design, But the kind of interventions that we have made over the years, that okay, we want people to stop throwing things in the river, so we have made all these sort of barriers, and now people put the flowers in a plastic bag because you can't throw it just like that anymore, and then you throw it. So, but when you cross the bridge, uh, except for the monsoon times, you don't really see the river. And you hear about the river again during the monsoons when the Lohe Wala Pol is under threat, when it has crossed the danger mark. So there is a deep disconnect between Delhi and Yamuna. And I'm all for having a better engagement. My only question is that how are we going to do that engagement? And again, I'm reiterating that point, that that engagement can't be done without understanding the various micro histories which make that 22-kilometer stretch of Yamuna. I'm not saying that people should not go there, but it also can't be in the same way as it has happened in many other cities, where you have basically put water from somewhere else in a river and then you are calling it a river. Okay, and then it's sort of so disconnected from so many things. So some sort of a dialogue or a debate has to take place, because when I see plans, I at least to me, they look extremely kind of misinformed, and without having any sort of background work on the riverfront development. So I'm all for this engagement. What I'm against is this ill-informed sort of thing, and the other thing is that we don't have anywhere in our planning domain to look at some of these, I mean, especially the water bodies, just as a water body and letting it be, as body fulfilling an important role of sustaining an ecosystem. We always tend to associate some sort of वाटर बॉडी है तो बोटिंग कर लेते हैं, वाटर बॉडी है तो एक वॉकवे बना ही देते हैं, वहां पे कुछ आइसक्रीम और चाट के खोमचे हम लगा देते हैं. सो आई थिंक वी जस्ट हैव टू गो बियॉन्ड दैट. आई एम नॉट सेइंग दैट यू डोंट हैव दैट, बट at least diversify.
So there's a question on that. In fact, Avli Verma says, "Thank you, Shubham. Very insightful talk. You hinted towards the historical views of." Sorry, Parthu, you had a third question, but I'm just segueing into this question, which has a relationship to what Shubham was discussing. So he says you hinted towards the historical views of river-based transportation and water transport systems, and exactly what you said. कि नदी है तो boat लगा देते हैं. So the question is about, now that we're seeing plans for inland water transport, water taxis, and even a water metro on the Yamuna, to stall, those stalled for a long time. What do you think of these initiatives from the perspective of an urban plan? Come back to your first one.
I don't really know at the moment. As an urban planner,
Definitely get to see the river.
hmm?
Definitely.
You will get to see the river. It's a form of engagement, yes. But I mean, yeah, there were similar forms of engagement earlier also. We had a regatta club near Okhla, which so that was also a form of engagement, and you will definitely get to see the river. I think one positive outcome of water transport would probably be they will probably have to remove some of these barrages, which will allow the river to flow more freely. So that definitely is going to be a positive outcome. And I mean, you will have to maintain some sort of flow for water transport, and also perhaps have, improve the water quality. So these are probably going to be a couple of good outcomes. It will be seasonal.
Like in Bangkok and public transport, so viable public transport system. So we can see in that perspective. So not just like the other, but like
Kolkata.
Kolkata.
Because it is so consistently equal or
Not a water.
Yeah.
And coming back to Parthu's third question about the importance of rural
capital city.
And the capital
So
city.
Delhi is from the capital, will be in the state it is today.
Maybe not in the same state, but then if I see other cities also, they tend to behave in the same manner. I mean,
So, right. In this redevelopment of the ridge, all the controversy, but there's also a lot of public debate, which we see in our affairs in our foreign thing about whether they should do JCBs to remove likely or not, and things like that. These micro debates don't happen very in other places. All of the multiplication is being reshaped by JCBs. Nobody's worrying about biotrust. And there's no conversation about biotrust going on.
but this question of the resource use, I think, arises in most of our cities. Delhi being the capital probably exploits much more, but then
Question.
yeah, but I mean,
Anymore.
yeah, I mean, Bangalore.
Reviving Ganga was a big issue, but in the beginning, there wasn't even a debate. When I was growing up, nobody talked about protecting Ganga. So, in recent times, at least, one of the positive things the government has done has to clean up Ganga, and actually there is water in the river all around. So, there are some positives.
Yes, there's some positives as well.
And if we could move to the next question, there are still a couple of questions here. Harleen Kaur has a question in relation to the Central Vista project. Harleen Kaur, would you like to share your thoughts now?
Part of this debate.
And
Listen to the question.
Huh?
Just listen to the question.
yes.
Hi,
Yes.
sorry, am I audible? My internet is not that great.
You're audible, yes.
Okay. Thank you for your wonderful presentation here. I'm also a historian, and I recently completed my PhD on New Delhi and its contemporary history. So this is something out of my own curiosity, which I wanted to ask you. So New Delhi's urban landscape and its relationship with water, what do you think about it? Because historically, New Delhi, as it was planned by the British and as it turned into a national capital, it has always been a low built and low density architecturally planned area, right? And not really hill, but mostly the trees and the water have had a huge impact on this low density. And as we have seen in some of the debates which took over the last few years, there were concerns regarding Central Vista being a highly flood prone area. And that's why keeping it low built was considered appropriate for the longest period of time, right? And some of this I encountered in my own research on New Delhi, where I found instances in 1950s when the government of like Krishi Bhavan and all, they were flooded basically during the monsoon season. And while now there's like a high density footprint on that particular area, what do you think will be the consequences in the larger terms? As you yourself mentioned, that the water tends to remember its way, like the river always, is gonna move back and forth. So how do you see that impacting that particular area?
I mean, I don't have a, thank you, Harleen. I don't have right now a ready-made answer as to how water is going to impact that particular area, but I'm just sort of, I've looked at a lot of these things from the historical spatial data and then what we have done to a lot of these spaces. So, and Central Vista, I cannot say right now, but we have seen the area where you have the airport. And I think now I just came across a news article where the Delhi airport is now water neutral. But it has flooded quite, especially Terminal 1 has flooded several times in the last 10 years or so. It's not particularly built on water bodies, but if you see old maps, we have a couple of lakes in the vicinity and low-lying areas. So again, basically, I reiterate that point and go back to the question that we have to uh, have some sort of an understanding of when we are planning for future. And Central Vista is no different from it. Because I mean, we have just seen it in many places in Delhi, and as part of this work, sometime in future, I would attempt a pretty detailed map of all the water bodies that that we can find, as well as the streams, channels, etc., and then uh, the major roads which have been built subsequently, and also overlay your flooding locations. And I feel that we'll have a lot of a sort of a positive correlation between them in the negative sense. So yeah, I mean,
Uh,
this is what I can say at the moment.
okay. Thank you so much. I think it would be interesting to look at such a work where you could, see where the floodplains are and how our built environment and planning has totally gone opposite in that direction, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Harleen. You see, Professor Narayani Gupta has joined the call. It's a privilege to have you here with us, ma'am. Could you please share your thoughts? We'd be really keen to hear your thoughts on Shubham's presentation and his work. Ma'am, can you hear us? She's here. She's brought her into the conversation here. I don't know if she. Professor Narayani Gupta, can you hear us, please? Maybe she can't hear us.
Does she have a question?
No, but we thought it would be, she knows Shubham's work well, and we thought perhaps she might want to share her thoughts on his presentation and his work.
Of course. Oh,
Yes, of course. While we wait for her, we could take a couple more questions and comments that have come in. There's an anonymous attendee who says, "Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I would like to ask you, you have talked about the evolution of Delhi's landscape and water bodies over the years and the recent events of flooding despite the master plans. Which city in India, according to you, is well planned and which can be followed as an example?" I'm also trying to think. Yeah, Calcutta, perhaps.
Okay, I'm not very familiar with Calcutta, but especially, I mean, if it's been well planned, especially in terms of flooding, then I think it's a rarity in the Indian landscape. So
Calcutta man sitting there, doesn't he get flooding? South Calcutta, all does.
Substantially less.
But it does.
Like much less than. And that's why I was writing the historic.
It's been a long, over the last 15 years or so that I've actually, similarly along with Chennai, the same.
Yes.
There is it's also been climate change related because the intensity of rainfall is. So in older places where we've had existing drainage infrastructure that needs to be applied and maintained, etc. There has been some effort with that. There's also, like in Chennai, substantial increase in infrastructure to cope with the intensity of rainfall.
Yeah.
Which have then some. There has been so there's that thought that's going through, but is there in areas which were historically, because Kolkata's structure is it's slope lake, and the drainage area of the salt lake was actually reclaimed and turned into this under municipality. So that then sort of affected the structure of the area. So that all of our cities have not been very good with that.
So we really can't hold that capital very nicely.
So maybe
I mean, it could just be a sort of a relative
maybe we
thing.
can agree on it being a slightly better
Yeah.
planned city than Bell or
We can debate this later.
Yes.
We still have one, we have a couple of comments. Well, again, there's an anonymous attendee who says, "Thank you for this talk. Very fascinating and poetic to imagine the city written by water. Indeed, your presentation was really wonderful." And BP Singh, who says, "A wonderful talk and workshop. It would be nice if a copy of the presentation could be shared." Yes, of course, the presentation will be available online on the CBR videos as well. So you're welcome to take a look at Shubham's work on the CBR website. With that, we should close this workshop, and I'd like to request Shubham to please share a few responses to the questions overall, and we could perhaps close after that. Shubham, to you.
Thank you, Professor Rajgopal. As I said, it's been an honor to be here and present this work. Although it's not really a part of my PhD, and also it's something which I've just been kind of building upon. So I worked on it in things, and I'm able to, get new insight or spatial data, an old map, which so I try to build my presented. But the discussion here was pretty extensive, and that also has given me a pretty good way forward into looking at some of these questions. There are a lot of these contested things, what Professor Patho also spoke about, the engagement. So that's something which, again, I'm not giving any recommendations as such, but at the back of my mind, it's helpful, to get these questions and these comments that, and also in the way we are and our cities are, we need to have a lot of debate and discussion to kind of accommodate different points of views, which probably happen, but not so much in practice. But yeah, these comments basically would help in looking at for me, in looking at certain things which I'd not really thought about so far. Also, the hill and the forest part is I know is missing at the moment, but it would take some more time to. I mean, I'm still looking at. I'm not finished with the river at the moment.
Out of that.
Yeah.
But surely the title itself is very attractive and poetic, just title brought me here, although I attend also other seminars. So hill, a river, and a city could be a beautiful story. Why do you have to write this more than a
Yeah,
You could write a fiction.
Yeah. I mean, I have always been.
That's what the problem has been. Urban canals has been fiction. If they could take it, Victoria has been at my field.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which parts?
Yeah, also, some of this just this new sort of I remembered something, and this related to the question that you asked, that where was the starting point. So the starting point was actually Bangalore, because 2 decades ago, I was gifted a book on Bangalore, the Deccan Traverses.
Yes, of course.
So it started from Deccan Traverses, and I sort of thought that, okay, nobody has written anything like this on Delhi. I mean, there is a lot of work on the Mughal history, the pre-Mughal history, and also the Rajputs, and I mean, so many things, and then planning and all. But you have a river, and like many other rivers, it's revered. But we hardly have anything which is sort of looking at this landscape from the banks of Yamuna, and then it's looking at the Aravalis, or from the Aravalis looking down the hill towards Yamuna. So Deccan Traverses is something that I spent a lot of time with, and I thought that, because I mean it kind of illustrated that landscape, that plateau very well.
And also that a different form of mapping.
Yeah.
An imagination of the relationship between land, water, and communities is essential. Is what Deccan Traverses and the work of Anuradha Mathur and Dilip Puna conveys.
It's a beautiful,
really landmark work. Wonderful. And normally I would have had my colleague from CSH, Rama Devi, would have joined us here to moderate the session and to respond and engage in a conversation with you. She had some other appointments today and she was unable to join us, but she has conveyed her best wishes. Thank you very much again, Shubham. This was fascinating indeed. We thoroughly enjoyed your presentation and we hope to engage further with you as well. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And all the best to you.
Thank you.
You write the book.
Thank you everyone in the audience.
And the seminar is closed.
The seminar is closed.